story starts with a girl named Jessica Sayers. And Jessica lived with her grandmother Mary in a sleepy hometown of Weybridge in Surrey, England. Surrey, England. I'm not gonna try to do accents through this whole thing. I'm not gonna put you through that. But anyway, she was just a normal 15-year-old girl. She had friends and she liked makeup and she loved going to the movies. As you do. You know? And when she was 15, she became really good friends with a girl named Alice. And we're calling her Alice in the story, but that isn't her actual name. I'm just saying that to protect her identity. But anyway, we're gonna call her Alice. So Jessica and Alice became really good friends, but they also became really good friends with a girl named Gemma Barker. And although Gemma was 2 years older, they all liked the same things and enjoyed each other's company. And actually, Alice was friends with Gemma before she was friends with Jessica, so Alice introduced Gemma to Jess, and they all kind of became friends, and it was really cool. And what they liked about Gemma is that she was 2 years older, and because she was 2 years older, she could drive. So they were able to go anywhere, anytime, and they loved that freedom. So they all got really close, and this was a time way back when MSN and Facebook were things that were actually popular. It was 2009. So Gemma, Jess, and Alice really enjoyed hanging out together, but they also enjoyed hanging out with each other online via message boards on MSN and Facebook and so on. And you know, as girls do, they talk about boys they like, who they like, whatever fits your fancy. And Alice and Jessica were really wanting boyfriends. So they were kind of always talking about that online and with Gemma. And then one day, Alice would get a friend request on MSN. And that friend request would be a guy named Aaron Lampard. And Alice would take some cautionary and she would see who Aaron's mutual friends were, and she would see that he actually had a lot of the same mutual friends as her, so she thought he was also cute. And she accepted his friend request, and they started to chat. And over a couple months, Alice and Aaron would get really close, and Aaron would start complimenting Alice and clearly showing that he was interested in Alice. And Alice would pay him the same compliments because she saw pictures of him. He kind of wore baggy clothes, but he had a really cool look about him. He was always wearing a hat, and she thought he was like really handsome. So she was feeling really good about this potential relationship. And at this point, she hadn't been in a relationship, nor had Jessica or Gemma really. So she was the first one to really start talking to a guy. So they would keep talking and talking. And then one day, Alice actually realized that Aaron had a mutual friend that she was really close with, and that was Gemma. So Alice would actually be with Gemma one day, and they would start to talk about Aaron. And she said that she actually knew him really well. Gemma said that she knew him really well, and that she would actually hang out with his older brother and actually really liked his older brother as well. So she kind of vouched for him. She's like, yeah, he's actually a really cool guy, and like, it's cool that you're talking to him because I already know his family and they're awesome as well. And Alice and Aaron hadn't met in person yet, so Alice kind of felt that validation that she could keep talking to him and that it wasn't really weird because one of her best friends knew who he was. So feeling encouraged by one of her best friends, Gemma, she would continue chatting with Aaron online. But not too long after that, she started to want more. She started to want to meet Aaron in real life, put a face to the name. You know, she knew what he looked like online, but you kind of don't know, and you kind of want to, you know, meet him in person, which is fair. But Aaron would be a bit standoffish to begin with. He would kind of constantly make up excuses not to meet her in real life. But eventually he realized that if he didn't meet her in person, he might lose Alice. So he decided to meet her. So they would get online and plan to meet at a park near Alice's house. And Alice would get ready, and she was nervous and excited, and she walked out the door ready to meet the man of her dreams. And when she got to the park, she would see a boy standing there in kind of dark, baggy clothes, wearing a toque or a beanie for you Americans, on top of his dark brown hair. And when he turned around, she would be happily surprised by how handsome he was. Bet you didn't see that coming. You thought he was going to be like some weird old freak, but he wasn't. Aaron was a handsome young man. So they would do that little awkward icebreaker conversation and get to know each other, and then they would go for a walk in the park, and it went really great. And a couple weeks later, after meeting several times, Aaron would actually ask Alice to be his girlfriend, and she would happily say yes. So it's 2009, like I said, and Alice and Aaron are in a steady relationship, and she obviously is talking about Aaron, her new boyfriend, to one of her best friends, Jess. And Jess, seeing Alice so happy, is very happy for Jess, her friend. And she insists on meeting this boy of Alice's dreams named Aaron. So Aaron and Jess would start talking online as well. So Alice and Aaron are together. You gotta stay with me, okay? There's gonna be a lot of people introduced in this story, so I'm just gonna keep telling you what's going on. So there's Aaron and there's Alice. They are together. And then there's also Jess, and then there is Gemma, who is Alice's friends, okay? We have them. Maybe make a thing up here. Alice, Jess, and Gemma. And then we have, Aaron down below is her boyfriend. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully for the listeners, God bless you. Hopefully you follow along, pay attention. But anyway, so Alice's friend Jess is now talking to Alice's boyfriend, Aaron, just as friends. They're getting to know each other, they're becoming friends. And they would start to talk every day, almost as much as Alice was talking to Aaron. Jess would talk to Aaron, either by message on MSN or Facebook, and even on the phone. And Jess would eventually deem Aaron as one of her boy best friends, and Alice is obviously one of her girl best friends. So they kind of became this really close-knit group. Meanwhile, Gemma actually started dating Aaron's older brother, Jack, during all of this time. So Gemma now has a boyfriend named Jack, and Alice has a boyfriend named Aaron, and Jess is currently single but is friends with everyone. So Alice would talk to Aaron, and Aaron would talk to Jess, and Jess would talk to Alice, and Gemma would talk to Alice, and all that stuff. But anyway, one day Alice was talking to Gemma, and she was asking him about Aaron's family because she hadn't met them yet. And Gemma was saying that they're super nice, and she would even show her pictures of Aaron's family because Gemma was dating Aaron's older brother Jack, so she had met him plenty of times. And Alice would start to really want to meet his family, so she would ask Aaron if she could meet his family. But it seemed every time she asked, Aaron would come up with some sort of excuse. Nothing too crazy, just like, he didn't feel well or something came up. But then tragedy kind of struck his family, and she felt bad for asking because one of his brothers ended up drowning in a terrible accident. And not long after that, one of his other brothers would get diagnosed with leukemia. So Alice kind of felt bad at this point. She didn't really want to pry, so she stopped asking to see his family as much, and they just continued their relationship. And she ended up being a shoulder for Aaron to cry on, and they kind of comforted each other during this time. So Alice and Aaron would continue their relationship, and Jess was friends with both of them, same with Gemma. But Aaron was kind of feeling bad that Jess was left out. She didn't have a boyfriend, and she really wanted one because he was talking to her a lot, and she was explaining how she was jealous of, not jealous, but she was really happy for Alice and Aaron. But she really wanted love for herself. And Aaron said, well, I have a friend actually, and I think you'd actually really like him. And this friend's name was Luke Jones. Okay, add it to the thing. Put it up here. I don't know where we are. I think Jess is over here. So Jess, Luke Jones for now, all right? So Jess would get introduced to Luke online, of course, as you do during the time, and they would start to talk. And Luke would be very flirtatious and funny, and he would pay Jess a lot of compliments, and she just loved that. Luke was like so her type, and after not a really long time, they would agree to meet up in person. And they would meet up in person, and she would think he was super cute, and one meetup would lead to 2 meetups, would lead to 3 meetups, and so on. They really hit it off. And Jess would say when she first met him and after she met him that he appeared and spoke very chavvy or chavvy. It's English slang, if you will, and it means a boy or a girl that always seems to wear designer or sport clothes. He wore snapbacks a lot, and Air Forces and hoodies and tracksuits. He was really like suave and stylish guy, this Luke Jones. He was a lot different than his friend Aaron, Alice's boyfriend, but she liked him a lot nonetheless. So both Jess and Alice would continue their relationships with Luke and Aaron, and Gemma would kind of fall to the wayside a little bit because she was having a full-time job at this point, and she was also dating Aaron's older brother Jack, and she was older as well, so they were starting to kind of drift apart a little bit. But we're still friends. But cracks started to form form in the new budding relationship between Jess and Luke. They continued their relationship through 2009, and naturally, they got closer and closer, but Luke got a little too close. See, this was Jess's first boyfriend, and she wasn't completely comfortable with going further than, hugging and kissing, but Luke was starting to pressure her into doing more stuff. Going as far as to put his hands down or up her skirt and going further than that, and Jess did not want to do that. And Jess would even tell him to stop on multiple occasions, but he would not stop. So he essentially SA'd her. And this was heartbreaking for Jess. This was her first boyfriend, and she really did like him. He really was nice, besides those moments where he was making her very uncomfortable. And unfortunately, Luke would go off and actually have relations with another girl that actually went to Jess's school, and she would just be heartbroken, and they would break off the relationship for good, and she would not see Luke again. And Jess would even make this known on Facebook, saying, "I hate you both. You're welcome to each other, fucking dickheads." I like that. She does kind of sound like that too. But fair enough. Luke's an asshole, right? So Jessica is heartbroken and upset, and her good friends Alice and Aaron are trying to comfort her at this point. But before too long, she gets another friend request on MSN, and that friend request was from a guy named Connor McCormick. So let me just put this up here. Okay, so Alice is still with Aaron, right? Gemma is still with Jack, okay? And now Jess was with Luke, but now Luke is gone, all right? And now there is Connor McCormick. Got it. Just wanted to make that clear. So Connor had been mutual friends with Luke and Aaron, and he had seen the post from Jess calling Luke out for cheating on her, basically. So he would reach out to Jess saying that he knew Luke, and Luke had actually told him everything that he had done to Jess, and he felt really bad for Jess. So Connor thought that was awful, and he would tell her that she didn't deserve that, and she deserved a lot better, and that's when a friendship would blossom between Jess and Connor. And they would become closer and closer as weeks went on. And they would kind of start to form a relationship of sorts before even meeting each other in real life. And from the photos, Jessica could see that Connor was a really stylish, good-looking guy. He wore skinny jeans, had that swooped, shaggy hair, and always wore a cap on his head, and he wore button-up shirts. He kind of looked like a knockoff Justin Bieber. And at the time, Jessica really loved Justin Bieber, so she was kind of like, this is the perfect guy for me. So in January of 2010, they would meet in real life for the first time, Jessica and Connor. And they would meet under a tree near Jessica's house, and Jessica would say that he dressed slightly different when she met him in person than from the pictures she saw online, and he wore a beanie or a toque for my Canadians, and he would wear a hood over his beanie or toque, and he kind of wore more baggier clothes, but from what she could see of his face, he was handsome nonetheless. And this would be how he would always dress, just kind of almost like covering himself. But Connor would say that he wore this hat and hoodie like this because he had alopecia, and Jessica actually had a brother with alopecia, so she kind of understood why he would feel nervous to show himself, because it made him uncomfortable. And for those of you who don't know what alopecia is, it's basically a general term for hair loss that can occur in many forms and for a variety of reasons. Basically, he just had really bad hair loss, and he was embarrassed of that. So Jessica totally understood, but one thing that was kind of strange about Connor is that he didn't talk. I mean, he didn't physically talk. He actually texted. When they were in person, she would talk to him and he would write out a text and show it to her or send it to her on her phone. He never actually spoke. And he would say on text, obviously, to her that it was because he was violently shy. He was just a very shy guy. So he seemed to have, a plethora of issues that he was dealing with himself, or a bunch of demons he was dealing with himself, but Jessica was very sweet and understanding and understood this, and she would keep on seeing him and keep on falling in love with him more and more. And one day he would actually give her a necklace and officially ask her to be his girlfriend, and Jess would say yes. And Alice obviously thought that Jess's new boyfriend Connor was a little bit strange for not talking to her, but she was supportive nonetheless, especially since Connor Connor was kind of mutual friends with her boyfriend, Aaron. And Connor and Aaron actually both lived in the same neighborhood, which was called St. George's Hill. And it was basically just a really well-off community. It was like footballers and celebrities lived in this community, and they both lived in this community, so it kind of was even more of a reason for these girls to be attracted to these guys, because they came from very affluent families, Connor and Aaron. But Jess and Alice hadn't actually been to their houses. They would always just kind of hang out around town, but they would always kind of meet them near that gated community of St. George's Hill. So while Jess was getting into her new budding relationship with Connor, Alice was getting more and more serious with her boyfriend, Aaron. So much so that they would start a physical relationship in the bedroom. But Aaron in this situation would stay mostly clothed, like fully clothed basically. And also he always wanted to do it in pitch black, which Alice thought was normal because this was her first boyfriend as well, and she didn't really know any better, so she just thought that that was normal. But one day they were hanging out and Aaron would ask Alice to grab keys from his bag because he needed it for something. And Alice would naturally go over to Aaron's bag and she would see a pink dildo in the bag, which just threw her off completely and freaked her the frick out because she had never seen one before, but it was plainly, you know, a dick in a bag, you know? And Aaron would say that he did actually use it one time while they were sleeping together, and Alice was completely taken back and confused by this, and she asked to just like have some time apart because she was like, whoa, what the frick? Like, you gotta talk to me about bringing that shit into the bedroom. Like, I should know this stuff, which is completely fair. So she's like, okay, hold up. Let's take a minute. Let's take a break. Meanwhile, in May, Connor would have a tragedy in his family and his nan would pass away. And he would ask to stay over at Jess's house for comfort. And at this point, Jess and Connor hadn't really had any sort of physical relationship together. They've just kind of hung out, you know, hugged, kissed here and there, but they have not, you know, been together in any sort of way. But Jess would obviously say, yeah, of course, I just need to ask my nan. So Jess would ask her nan if Connor could come over. And given the circumstances, Jess's nan was a little bit reluctant. She's like, I don't know about this guy, you know, that's a little inappropriate. Like, you guys are only, you know, 15 years old. That's a little weird. But she would say it's okay. And she would quote unquote say, he better keep his pecker in his pants, which I think is hilarious. So Connor would make his way over, but he would tell Jess ahead of time to tell her nan that he had lost his voice because he didn't really want to talk to her nan because he's never talked to Jess, let alone her nan. So he's like, make up an excuse for me because I don't want your nan to know that I just talked to you through text because that's weird. So Jess would cover for him and tell her nan that. And her nan just kind of already sussed him out and was like, that's f***ing weird. But he would come over and he would just kind of grunt to Jess's nan, and Nan would ask him a bunch of questions and he would just be like, and he would point over to Jess's room and go, and then her nan was like, yeah, all right, go to her room, like, you're fucking weird. So she was feeling uneasy about Connor, but like, she knows that he just went through a death in his family, so she didn't really push, and Jess and Connor went into Jess's room for the night. So Jess and Connor are in Jess's room, and they would, you know, do what you teenagers do. They'd start hugging and kissing, and then Connor would begin to undress Jess, and Jess would ask him to stop, and that's when he would begin to SA her. It was just Luke all over again, her last boyfriend. Like, Connor was just doing the same thing. And Jess would continue to plead to Connor to stop, and after asking a bunch of times, he finally would. And very, very soon after, Jess would get a call on her phone. And this is where we start to get really weird. She would see that Alice was calling, and she would pick it up and say hey, and Alice could tell right away that something was wrong with Jess, that Jess was clearly upset. But before Jess could say anything to Alice, Connor would grab the phone and say, or text, he would text Alice on Jess's phone that Aaron had got in a horrific car accident. And Alice was horrified reading this. She hadn't talked to Aaron since the whole, you know, dick in a bag situation, so she's like horrified. And then Connor would say that he went through the windshield of the car and that he was on life support in the hospital, and Alice is just like horrified, and Jess is like, oh my god, that's horrible. And then Connor would just be like, yeah, isn't it a shit situation, mate? Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it, mate? Anyway, and Alice and Connor would have, you know, a little bit more of a conversation about everything they just talked about, and they would go to bed. But Jess was naturally way too upset to go to sleep, and she was feeling extremely suspicious of Connor at this point with all the news that he just gave Alice, and he didn't tell Jess beforehand. She found out when Alice found out, which was weird. And then the whole, you know, essaying thing was pretty fucking terrible and weird. So she turned over in bed to look at Connor. Connor, the one who was always wearing a hoodie and hat, kind of down and over his face. And at this point, his hat was a little bit up and she could see more of his face. So when she turned over to look at Connor, she figured out that she was looking at the profile of Aaron. Aaron is Alice's boyfriend, who Connor just said was in the hospital on life support after a car accident. So let me set this up right now, okay? We got Gemma and Jack, or whatever the fuck his name was. And then we got Alice and Aaron, and then we got Jess and Connor. So Aaron was pretending to be Connor, and he went to Jess's and he essayed her as and he lied to Alice about him being in the hospital, himself being in the hospital as Aaron, but he was pretending to be Connor. Does this make sense? I think it does. I feel like it does. And if you can't follow along, just restart the video. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, so Jess turns over, she looks at her boyfriend Connor and realizes that it's actually her friend's boyfriend, Aaron, and she's freaking out. She's horrified, obviously, as you would be, and she doesn't know what to do. So she's kind of catatonic, thinking about all of her options, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna pretend this never happened at this point, and in the morning, I'm just kicking him the fuck out. I'm not even telling him I know, I'm just kicking him out, and I need to think. So that's what she did. The next morning, super early, before her nan was even up, she's like, get the fuck out, and she had enough reason after he did what he did that night, you know, and she would kick Connor / Aaron out the door, and she would never see Connor / Aaron again. So Jess is, just going about her day, trying to put together everything, and she hadn't talked to Alice yet at this point. Alice went to school, and after the whole day, Alice is worrying about her boyfriend, Aaron, who's supposed to be on life support at this point because of the horrible car accident that he didn't get into. And then her dad pulls up to pick her up from school, and who's in the car? Aaron, her boyfriend, is in the car, and he doesn't have a scratch on him. So Alice is like, what the fuck? I thought you were dying in the hospital. And he said, oh no, I just got whiplash, mate. Like, I just got whiplash. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. And Alice is growing suspicious at this point. And her suspicions were confirmed when Jessica would call Alice and tell Alice that Aaron had been in her bed last night. And that's when Jess would go to the police and tell them that Alice's boyfriend, Aaron Lampard, SA'd her. And, Alice was beside herself, horrified that this happened. And they're putting the pieces together, Jess and Alice, and they're like, what the frick is going on right now? So in their minds, Aaron is this lying sack of shit, right? So the police would naturally go to Alice's house to question her about Aaron. But who's at Alice's house? Aaron's at Alice's house. How convenient. And Alice would just tell Aaron to give them the hospital records at this point, because she knows now that Aaron was lying to her about being in the hospital. She's just kind of putting him on the spot, being like, well, just give the police your hospital records, and then they can clear you that you weren't in Jessica's bed last night. And he was like, oh no, I can't find the hospital records, even though it was last night, I can't find it. And he just kept making these excuses. Meanwhile, Luke, Jess's previous boyfriend, her first boyfriend, posts on Facebook at this time, quote unquote, hello, I'm sorry to say that thing with Jess, that was me. I did it because I wanted her to hate Connor. And in another post, he said, I want people to know it's me because Aaron is getting the blame for something I done, and I think that's not right. So Luke was taking the blame for what Aaron had done, or sorry, what Connor had done, but it was actually Aaron. So Luke, Aaron, and Connor are all like shitnicks together, like who was actually in bed with Jess that night. So the police, confused as ever, as I'm sure you all are, and I am honestly, were like, unable to find Luke at this point. And they were like, who is Luke? Like, we can't find who he is. We see his profile, but we can't place him to where he's from or what his address is. So one day, shortly after the ordeal, Aaron was asked for his address by the police. And Aaron would provide his address, or should I say a fake address. Meanwhile, he, meaning Aaron, asked Alice to meet him down by the river to talk. But he would be met by the police instead, because the police were like, you're not from this address that you gave us, which was from that really affluent neighborhood that I was talking about. So he lied where he was from. And then they would be like, Alice, like, we're gonna take your place in this meeting, and they would meet Aaron and then arrest him on the spot. So Aaron would be put in the back of the police car and he would be taken into custody, where he would get strip searched. And this is where it all comes crashing down and where it's gonna make sense. It's gonna start making sense, but also not making sense. So Aaron would get strip searched, and this is where Aaron's whole plan would come crumbling in on itself, and it would come crumbling in on him as well. Or should I say, her? Yes, you heard me. Aaron, Luke, and Connor were finally revealed as one manipulating, puppet mastering, shape-shifting girl. And that girl's name was Gemma Barker. Gemma was pretending to be 3 different guys, her friends' boyfriends, who essayed her. Are you caught up? Here, I'll do the thing again, all right? We have Gemma, Alice, and Jess, okay? Gemma's dating Jack. Jack doesn't exist, right? Gemma was Aaron, who's Alice's boyfriend, and Gemma was also Luke, who was Jess's first boyfriend, and Gemma was also Connor, who was Jess's second boyfriend. So she literally pretended to be 3 different guys, and her friends did not realize that their boyfriends were their best friend. Okay? So her plan was completely revealed and foiled at this point. And Alice and Jess, people who were supposed to be friends of Gemma's, were absolutely shocked and horrified, because they thought for months from November 2009 to May 2010 that these 3 separate boys were boys, not their good friend Gemma disguising herself as a boy and having relations with them. Like, how could, like, that doesn't even make sense. And a lot of people, scrutinized the girls, being like, how could you not know that it's your best friend dressed up as boys? But they were like, who would expect their best friend to dress up as boys and pretend? And she would do a very good job of pretending to be boys. Going back to the beginning in like the perspective of Gemma. So basically, Gemma was friends with Jess and Alice, and through the relationship, since he was 2 years older, she would actually go off to college and she would start to get kind of separated from Alice and Jess, and she would be kind of jealous of their friendship, and she would want them to be friends with her more and more. And whether she was dealing with, some sort of sexuality confusion, or if she just wanted to manipulate them single-handedly, I'm not sure, but she conjured up a plan to become the perfect boyfriends for her friends, because she knew everything that both Alice and Jess loved in boys. She knew that Jess loved Justin Bieber, and she knew that Alice loved guys that had a lot of swagger to them and liked certain sports and everything. So she literally was able to create these boys who were perfect for her friends, and she was able to disguise herself, and she worked so hard on making her voice sound like a boy's voice, but she didn't want to use that voice too many times because she was already using it for Aaron and for Luke. So by the time she got to Connor, she's like, I can't keep talking in the same voice. So she literally just didn't talk as Connor at all. And when she went too far with Jess as Luke, she realized she needed to get rid of Luke completely and become Connor and be somebody different. But then she would end up falling into her essaying disgustingness all over again, because it's terrible. There's no excuse for it. And then Aaron, who was Alice's boyfriend, who's actually Gemma, would use that, dick in a bag to pretend that she was a boy. Since she was in pitch black, she could literally pretend that dick was hers, and Alice didn't know the difference, because again, these were their first boyfriends. They were completely in the dark with all of this. So Gemma was able to manipulate them for months and months and months, and they didn't know better. I mean, they knew by the end that something was suspicious AF, but for her to be able to manipulate them for that long is like insane. And even after Gemma got arrested, she tried to keep up the facade by saying Luke, the guy she pretended to be, beat her up and assaulted her. But obviously Luke isn't a real person and it wasn't true, so she would end up getting charged with fraud on top of the charges she got for sexual assault on her friends. And in 2012, Gemma would plead guilty to 2 counts of sexual assault and 1 of fraud. And then she would be sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, which is kind of like 2.5 years. Like, that's fucking nothing. That's nothing. But I mean, I guess she was, at this point, I think she was 18. She was 2 years older. So, but yeah, I think she should have got more, because that's like, that's crazy behavior. It's psychopathic behavior, if you ask me. Like, Gemma exploited and manipulated these 2 girls who trusted her as a friend, and because of either jealousy or sexual confusion or just straight up deceitful manipulation, she did all these things without thinking of how it would affect her friends at all, like psychologically and physically. And she would even get a psych eval before her sentencing, and it would show that Gemma did have a borderline learning disability and a difficult in understanding social situations, and she would also be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and ADHD, but none of that justifies what she did. She knew exactly what she was doing, and that's why she got sentenced and convicted of what she did. Even the judge would go on to say after sentencing, quote unquote, "Nothing that you have ever said to any expert or the police sheds any light on or provides any understanding of your motivation for these offenses. Nor have I, nor anyone else, seen any flicker of remorse for what you have done." So clearly the judge didn't have remorse for her, which fair enough. Like, what a piece of shit. So she went to jail. She went to jail. Don't know a whole lot about her now, but my God, literally a girl pretended to be 3 different guys, and also with her good friends. Like, the level of manipulation is insane. These poor girls also. I hope you enjoy the audio versions of these as well. If you enjoy those, you can go to Spotify and enjoy those. And if you want some sour candy, go to sour.gg. Grab some candy. Get something sweet after a sour story like this, you know. But yeah.